if there was something that happened, and let's say the police came and investigated this incident, a crime was committed, and the police were called. And when the police showed up and began to question several people who said they were eyewitnesses to what transpired, what do you think the police would think if everybody's story was exactly the same? Anybody?
I'll take that question. This Minister Gray. I would think the police would think that they were lying, because if you got quite a few people and everybody tell the same exact story, the exact way, then it would have to be that you rehearse the story in order to make the story be exact, because everybody have a different way of telling a story. So you can't take a group of people to tell the same story the same way. Mm-hmm. That's my thoughts.
Okay. If everybody told the story exactly the same, would you think the story is more accurate or less accurate? Anybody?
Well, I'm gonna go with more accurate.
If it's exactly the same.
It's exactly the same.
Then it's like Minister Green said, that was rehearsed so everybody said the same thing, because people, I've seen several documentaries about, when they were talking about eyewitness reports, one where they even took 5 people and they created a situation. And then after the situation was over with, they asked 5 different people, what did they see? And nobody saw the same thing. And that's a thing that I've heard, that if a group of people say exactly the same thing, it's because they've rehearsed it so they can make it seem like it's the truth.
That's right. And so, go ahead. Who's there? Go ahead.
We've always did a test, where, and I'm sure some people have done this, you have a whole group of people and then you whisper in their ear something, and when something you did at first, give the first person's, and then when it get around the room, it's told something totally different. Mm-hmm. Because, people, they change it. Mm-hmm. They're saying basically what they heard, but it's in a different way when it get to the last person in the room.
Right. So we hear things differently. We see things differently. Go ahead, Maurice.
No, I'm saying, to me, it depends on what it is.
Okay.
Because if it's something real simple,
okay.
Unfortunately, we'll use this analogy. 10, 15 people outside, somebody gets shot, and all the guys go, well, he shot him. Well, then,
okay.
Or you going to jail. But if a lot of certain things took place, with this happening and this happening and that happened, and then they all get it all. You think that group was in it together,
right? So here's a point I can see you making, and that's the exact point I'm looking for. I like every comment. You made a point that I want to hit on. Everybody comes to the conclusion on the main thing. He shot him, right? But all the details leading up to how we got to that main detail will be different based on everybody's vantage point. So let's take that same concept you just said, Maurice, and apply it to this story in Matthew 8 and Luke 7. The main point is that Jesus was asked to heal the centurion's servant. And both of them tell you that. But the finer details of how we get to it are different. And quite honestly, hear me when I say this, it makes the story more believable, not less believable. One of the arguments that is often heard against believing what the Gospels say is that they contradict one another. How can both Gospels be accurate if they give different accounts of the same thing? A surprising discovery is that many historians consider minor variations to be evidence in favor of the truth of an account and not a reason to discount it as true. Minor variations in the story make the story more believable, not less believable. The idea is that if the writers were lying, watch this, if they were lying, they would have made sure to get their stories straight, and they'd agree in the details. What seems to be a contradiction is often just the same event viewed from a different perspective. I'll give you another example. So during the time, I'll tell you something I read years ago. It said this: if the disciples were lying as they were trying to tell this story about Christ, and particularly the story of the resurrection, somebody said they are the worst liars in the history of lying in the world. And one of the things that they pointed out was this: that a woman's word during their period of time was not to be trusted or believed. And so if they were trying to perpetrate a fraud and they wanted that fraud to be believable, then the last thing they would have told us is that the women were the first ones who got to the tomb of Christ and were the eyewitnesses first that he was no longer there. That if they wanted to tell this story and make it believable, then they would have said that it was them. Because a woman's word at the time was not the most trustworthy word when it came to telling a story or giving an account. That if they were not being truthful, they said they were the worst at doing it. So could it be that they told us that the women were first because it was just the truth? That if they were trying to perpetrate a fraud, it would have been them that showed up at the tomb and were the witnesses that saw Jesus no longer there. It would not have been Mary. It would not have been the women, it would have been the men, because men's words were to be believed and more seen as more trustworthy than a woman's word. So if they were trying to perpetrate a fraud, they would have never done it that way, unless one of two things: they were just dumb at what they were doing, or could it be they were just telling us it happened the way it happened? And so I challenge us as we look at this and we continue to go through the eyewitness accounts. I want to show you something, and I'll close it with this. I got a couple things I want to say. I'll close it with this. So we talk about manuscripts, a number of things that were written about a thing, a particular thing. To what extent Simon Greenleaf of Harvard Law School, there is enough of a discrepancy to show that there could have been no previous concert among the gospel writers, and at the same time, such substantial agreement as to how they all were independent narrators of the same great transaction. That there's enough discrepancies to show that they were not writing what they were writing in concert with one another, that they weren't comparing their notes, they weren't trying to figure out how to get their stories together, is what he's saying. That they can look at these stories, compare them, look at each of their accounts and say there's enough discrepancy that lets us know that they were not sitting together comparing their notes as they were telling their stories about the life of Christ. There is no comparison. The manuscript evidence for the New Testament is overwhelming when juxtaposed against other revered writings of antiquity. This is what I want you all to see. There is no comparison. When you look at the Gospels and other writings of antiquity, there is no comparison. And you'll see what I'm about to show you in a minute. Works that modern scholars have absolutely no reluctance in treating as authentic. The grand total of Greek manuscripts is 5,664. In addition to the Greek documents, there are thousands of other ancient New Testament manuscripts in other languages. There are 8,000 to 10,000 Latin Vulgate manuscripts, plus a total of another 8,000 in Ethiopic, Slavic, and Armenian. In all, there are about 24,000 manuscripts in existence that point back to the Gospels in Latin, in Ethiopic, in Slavic, in Armenian, and all of these other languages, in the Greek, 24,000. Let's make a comparison. Homer's Iliad, there are 650 other documents that point back to it. And ancient writers and studiers of ancient manuscripts have no problem arguing the authenticity of Homer's The Iliad. Plato's writings that a lot of scholars look at as authentic have 30 manuscripts that point back to them. The Jewish War by the 1st century historian Josephus, that nobody argues, but I'm sure there's some people who argue, but people look at as authentic. There are nine that point back to it. By comparison, 24,000 other writings that write to the that people are writing to the authenticity of the New Testament. 24,000. Homer's Iliad has 650, Plato's writings have 30, and Josephus's account of the 1st century Jewish war has 9. The more often you have copies that agree with each other, especially if they emerge from different geographical areas, the more you can cross-check them to figure out what the original document was like. The only way they'd agree would be where they went back genealogically in a family tree that represents the descent of the manuscripts. The quantity of New Testament material is almost embarrassing in comparison with other works of antiquity. That's written by Bruce Metzger, who is the professor emeritus at Princeton's Theological Seminary. That when you look at the number of documents that point back from all over and varying different geographical locations from around the known world that point back to the New Testament writings, it is overwhelming, the evidence that we find to the authenticity of these documents.